longer hear you. Hello and welcome to this version of MCC Corporate College Training Tuesdays. Our session today is on leveraging diversity to achieve business success. We have with us Fernand Sapero, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer and Chief Diversity Officer at the YMCA of Greater Rochester. Fernand is also our corporate college instructor for our SHRM certification program, preparation program. We're completing a cohort of that program this week, and again another session of the SHRM program for those of you in human resources who are looking to expand your career and to find that certification achievement that you need to grow in your position or grow in a new position. We recommend you look at our website, workforceforward.com, and see when that next program exists, along with our other training and development opportunities that you can find at workforceforward.com. Again, we thank Fernand for leading our session today. He is an outstanding leader in this community and in this space, and we look forward to hearing his presentation beginning right now. Fernand, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome everybody. So, and thank you for that introduction. So let's get started. Okay, so today I'm going to cover several areas: workplace diversity and inclusion, the business case for diversity, key trends and demographic shifts, what it means for you, and then towards the end, hopefully we'll have an opportunity for questions and comments. As you're listening to the presentation, if you want to type in a question into the chat box, that would be fine. Okay, so one of the key takeaways from today is defining diversity. And when managed well, diversity is one of the most important assets an organization has in order to achieve and maintain a competitive advantage. So effective diversity management is equal to having a competitive advantage, and we'll discuss that today and how that could be achieved. So first, let's start off with defining diversity. Diversity and this is from the SHRM body of competencies and knowledge. It's the qualities, life experiences, personalities, education, skills, competencies, and collaboration of the many different types of people who are necessary to propel an organization to success. So with that definition, our view of diversity is changing. It has moved from a defensive position, in other words, as a matter of legal or ethical compliance, to a strategic position where it is as valuable an asset to be leveraged. Diversity of thought adds to an organization a broader range of perspectives and modes of thinking, and the results are in greater innovation, creativity, and problem-solving capabilities. When we define inclusion, we're referring to diversity and inclusion. Diversity asks the questions, who do we bring into our organization? Where inclusion asks, how do we make them feel welcome? Inclusion is how you leverage the value of the diversity, and diversity is the byproduct of effective inclusion. Now, diversity without inclusion is known as covering. Now, this is when an organization promotes assimilation, not inclusion, where employees learn to cover their appearance, their affiliation, their advocacy, or association. So it's more taking the position that you need to become more like us This is the culture of our organization. So you're truly not embracing the diversity and making the person feel welcome into your organization. There is an excellent book on this subject if you would like to read it, and there's a quick video on it on YouTube. It's entitled "A Peacock in the Land of Penguins," and I highly recommend that. And that is a great case study on what covering does to an organization and the talent within the organization. So the benefits of diversity are, again, improve creativity and innovation. It definitely helps you in your recruitment and retention efforts. It gives you market strength. It promotes your branding in the community. And it also provides, if your organization is such, global integration with local differentiation. Excuse me. So why do organizations need a diversity and inclusion strategy? Well, the first reason is priority. Diversity and inclusion efforts will always have a lower priority than more immediate concerns. The second is complexity. Diversity and inclusion's complex problems need a strategic organization-wide solution. And the third is resistance. Diversity and inclusion involves major organizational change, and change is hard. One of the things that I caution colleagues and other organizations that built on diversity and inclusion is that D&I should not be limited to an initial workshop or a training. Far too often, organizations feel that if we have our employees go through diversity and inclusion training, well, then that makes our organization more diverse and inclusive. Training and workshops such as those are important, but to remember is that training does not equal systemic change for the organization. You're essentially planting the seed with that first workshop, and what comes as a result of that are a lot of questions, a lot of inquiry, and that's what is the start and the spark for the cultural shift within the organization. So it's important to keep that in mind. The D&I process is one that is cyclical, and it's one that it's an evergreen process, and one that I am continually looking at within my organization. And it first has to start off with executive commitment. It has to be embraced and led from the top. From there, conduct a preliminary assessment as far as what is the understanding of diversity and inclusion in our organization, how do employees perceive it, do they recognize it, and then from there you create the infrastructure to support diversity and inclusion, introduce any system changes that may be necessary. Then, and the fifth step is where you would provide the training. So essentially for the first 4 steps, you're conducting a needs assessment and a needs analysis in your organization before you even launch into training. Then you measure and evaluate how the organization is moving with respect to the culture of diversity and inclusion within the organization. Then you move into a step of evolution and integration. So there may be some things that you find within your organization or in your community that you need to adapt or adopt into your organization. And then from there, you again reevaluate the executive commitment, and you start the cycle and the process all over again. I'll illustrate that with an example from my organization, where about 10 years ago we introduced a program within the YMCA known as Silver Sneakers, and that yielded about 10,000 new members into our organization. So that provided us an opportunity on our diversity and inclusion journey to take a step back. And one of the things that is one of the pillars of our diversity and inclusion statement is that our organization is for all. so we took a step back and our diversity and inclusion team and asked ourselves, does this new demographic represent our staff component and our volunteer component? So we went and actively recruited from this new demographic that was now coming to our organization. That resulted with us increasing our active older adult workforce population that was at 5% to today at 30% of our workforce component. And over the last 10 years, we've received recognition from AARP as being a best employer for workers over the age of 50. So I wanted to highlight that as an example of evolution and integration. So we're looking at demographic shifts in our community, and are those demographic shifts reflective of our workforce? So the D&I work is intentional and constantly being looked at through that lens. I'm going to break down each of the steps for you. Well, the first step is executive commitment. So in order to make the business case for diversity and inclusion, you have to show your senior management team that it can play a critical role in achieving core business goals. You have to link it to your organization's unique mission, vision, and business objectives, and realign it over time with corporate strategic reevaluation and repositioning, just as in the example that I just shared with you. The preliminary assessment that you would conduct has a twofold purpose. First, to identify current needs and to set corresponding priorities, goals, and objectives, and to provide benchmarks to measure the success or failure of subsequent diversity and inclusion strategies. Your infrastructure creation would have three components to it. First is diversity councils, and those are task forces to define and guide the diversity and inclusion initiative. Here at the YMCA, we have a diversity and inclusion team, which is representative of a cross-section of employees across our 17 locations. We also are engaged in employee resource groups on a national level, and these are voluntary groups for employees who share a diversity dimension. We have an African American leadership network, a Hispanic leadership network, Asian leadership network, a women's leadership network, an LGBTQ leadership network, women's leadership. We encourage participation of all employees in all those resource groups, and the leaders of those resource groups share with them their dimensions of diversity and inclusion, and in turn that creates a greater awareness within the organization and nationally with respect to what those employees in those groups bring to the table. We also have strategic alliances, and that's formal links with national and global diversity organizations. Here locally, we are a member of the Workforce Diversity Network, and through that organization, we're able to obtain benchmark information from other members that are part of the organization, share our own successes, and it helps us align our strategic plan with respect to diversity and inclusion and align that to national trends that may be happening. So I would encourage you to seek out participation in a group such as that. System changes, and that's where we review and revise to align with diversity goals. That would include organizational systems, operational processes, procedures, and practices. So we took a look at our recruitment, sourcing, and hiring, our onboarding, and we also look at our retention. We look at our promotions and career development. We examine our compensation and benefits. From a procurement standpoint, we look at our supply chain and management relations. And then with marketing, we look at our marketing, branding, and customer relations. We are very sensitive, for example, in our marketing and branding, that our marketing and branding reflects, again, the demographics of our organization and also reflects the demographics of the community in which we serve. Training would include diversity awareness courses. Now that is, as you can see, just one leg of a three-legged stool for diversity and inclusion. There are also diversity management courses that support the diversity awareness, or is the next step after diversity awareness, and then professional development opportunities within diversity and inclusion, so the employees have an opportunity to put those practices in place. We just recently launched nationally a certification within our organization for global leadership and diversity and inclusion development, where participants get to apply not only what they learned in their diversity and awareness courses and diversity management courses, but they're creating a tangible project or program that directly impacts our strategic plan in diversity and inclusion. It's more or less the capstone of that professional development opportunity. So they get to provide not only input, but also provide a program or a service that supports diversity and inclusion within our organization. And what is unique about that certification is it's not limited to employees, but it's also open to volunteers as well, because volunteers make up a core component of our organization. In measurement and evaluation, we have process measures. How did we do? What went well? What didn't go well, and why? And then result measures, and what difference has it made to the organization? So we participate, for example, in a national diversity and inclusion survey, which looks at all those measures in greater detail, and then we get a report out not only on our organization, but benchmark against the other 853 YMCAs across the country, so we can have a good idea as far as how we are stacking up with our diversity and inclusion efforts on a national level. And we're also able to identify areas of opportunity that are common across the country, so we're able to work together to address those issues and or concerns. In the last step, evolution and integration, on the integration bucket, we look at what makes diversity and inclusion a part of who we are as a business. And then in the evolution, we look at if possibilities for global expansion, the initiative's own success, so what have been the success stories with diversity and inclusion, and what shifts in focus over time. So again, we're looking at the shifting demographics. So what's going to change and what's going to evolve with respect to diversity and inclusion, because it is never static. So we're looking at it through that lens, and then we start the process again. So what is HR's role with respect to diversity and inclusion? Well, they will ensure that the diversity and inclusion strategy positively influences three areas. First, managerial skills and practices, individual attitudes and behaviors, and also policies and procedures that promote diversity within the organization. With respect to individuals' attitudes and behaviors, we look at diversity and inclusion through a global mindset. And while our operations are here in Rochester, we recognize that there are many demographic shifts that are happening. Rochester is rapidly becoming a majority city. It has a great number and a great influx of newcomers from other countries. So there are relational skills that we want to equip our employees with, and that would include emotional intelligence, intercultural wisdom, building trust, managing conflict, and negotiating. And instilling these qualities throughout the organization is a critical outcomes-based human resource responsibility. So human resources in our organization is a steward, of attitudes and behaviors within the organization. But what is the global mindset? Now, developing a global mindset is key for human resource professionals to study and understand. You have to look at global events and business trends, know your own culture and other cultures. Human resource professionals should become more curious about other cultures and educated about the way, there's a typo there, the way culture affects behavior. Briefly, we look at cultures in two aspects. We look at high context cultures and low context cultures. High context cultures have a complex, long-standing networks of relationships, a rich history of common experiences and implicit rules. What you say may not be what you mean, and examples of this would be China, Japan, France, and many Latin American countries. Low context cultures have relationships have less history. Background information is packaged with explicit information. What you say is what you mean. And for example, those countries would be the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada. That's particularly important for our organization because of the cross-section of members that we have, and they're coming from different cultures. So it's important for us to understand the differences between the high context cultures and low context cultures so that we are better equipped to address those organizations. Those individuals. I'm not going to read through all this, but I will provide Jim a copy of the presentation if you wish to have it, and I'll send this out to you. But these are Hofstede's dimensions of culture, and these are things that I look at, and it's part of the management training that employees receive, and it helps. And again, it equips them with the intercultural wisdom that they need in the emotional intelligence and helping them to build trust with the members of our community and our organization. Again, this is another resource for intercultural wisdom, Trumpenard's and Hamden Turner's dilemmas. And here are some of the challenges that you may face with different cultures, and those can range from limited worldviews, judgmental characterizations, cultural determinism, everything may vary with the situation, or agreeing with programs and then sabotaging their success. Now, how do you reconcile those? Well, first you have to create an awareness of cultural diversity, appreciate the value of each of the cultures, have a process to resolve differences and find a common path, so that would be the inclusion piece, and realize and root, which means to implement and reward actions that recognize and reconcile those differences. So your objective is to create cultural synergy, and that would be the last line that you see there, creating a new alternative, and that's through cultural synergy. Our objective in our organization is that we're for all, so we work very hard in understanding the different cultural dimensions that we work and interact with and strive to create a cultural synergy within the organization. And that's only supported through training and development and helping our staff achieve the cultural awareness that they need to have to develop those relationships and build trust within the organization. So let's now talk about diversity and corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility includes a broader range of a decision or action effects on a broader field of stakeholders. Attention to corporate social responsibility has moved from the corporate periphery to center stage, and is integrated into the organizational mission and strategy. For the YMCA, for example, our corporate social responsibility statement is part of our branding, and that is that we are for youth development, healthy living, and for social responsibility. So our CSR statement has become center stage, not only within our organization, but also for the community at large. So what are some of the forces that shape today's corporate social responsibility? And for your organization, it may be some of these, or it may be one or two of these. There could be technology where that's driving your corporate social responsibility. Corporate actions are more knowable. CSR impacts are more measurable. A good example of that is social media. Social media may be driving your corporate social responsibility. Environmental concerns, and that would include increased sustainability regulations and requirements, or increased sustainability opportunities. So if you're in manufacturing, your corporate social responsibility statement may be driven by that, or economic pressures, bigger payback potential for sustainability efforts, enhanced employee value proposition, and how that relates to the value of corporate social responsibility. Socio-political forces, rapidly evolving diversity attitudes, increased pressure from civil and social rights groups. So all those factors, or some of those factors, may impact your CSR. How does CSR and diversity relate? Well, the Chief Diversity Officers and Chief Human Resources Officers have an opportunity to become a CSR resource for corporate leaders. So they have key opportunity areas in culture change, corporate strategy, organizational effectiveness, and cultural competency development. I have the good fortune of having both of those roles, and the reason for that is my CEO recognized the importance of that with relation to our CSR statement. So he gave me both responsibilities, so I'm able to manage that and facilitate that effectively within my organization. Now I'm going to shift a bit and talk about ethics, and that is a set of behavioral guidelines by which all directors and managers and employees are expected to behave to ensure appropriate moral, ethical business standards that are typically beyond the level of the law. So if you think back to a few slides previously, where diversity and inclusion is moving from just being defensive as a matter of legal or ethical compliance, it's moving more towards strategic, an asset to be leveraged, and that's where we are going beyond the letter of the law. So what's the difference between compliance and ethics? Well, compliance asks the question, what can I do? And it adheres to the letter of the law, and it's basically a rules-based culture. Ethics asks, what should I do? And it strives to follow the spirit of the law, and it's a values-based culture. So through the lens of diversity and inclusion, if you're just looking at your diversity and inclusion recruitment efforts, for example, as something that you have to do to comply with, say, for example, your affirmative action plan or the EEOC, that's compliance. But if you move the needle more broadly and ask, what should I do, and what efforts is my organization to attract and retain individuals that reflect the demographics of my community, then that's moving you to be a more values-based culture where diversity and inclusion is an integral part of that. So, are we moving forward? And how has the field of diversity and inclusion progressed over the last 10 years? And this is from a survey that was taken in 2006. And as you can see, 56% of organizations surveyed say that they have advanced significantly. 23% feel that there has been no advancement. 1% feel that they have regressed significantly, and 20% aren't sure. So as you take a look at that pie chart, think about where you think your organization has moved with respect to diversity and inclusion. Where does it fall into that pie? SHRM research from that same year says that 76% of human resource professionals say their organizations are actively leveraging workforce diversity. And that's broken down in the following areas. 61 say that they're doing that by tapping employees of all backgrounds to increase innovation. 59% say that by using employees of all backgrounds to recruit new employees. 53% by integrating diversity into business strategies. 53% also say by meeting the needs of customers with unique needs. And 52% say by utilizing diverse experience levels on different projects. So you can see from this research that these practitioners have truly moved diversity and inclusion into their business strategies. 85% say their organizations encountered challenges in the past 12 months in executing diversity efforts. Top three reasons are 35% say diversity is not present at all levels of the workforce. 26% say that not enough employees of various backgrounds are being recruited, and 26% say that diversity efforts are not properly communicated at all levels of the workforce. I'm personally addressing number one and number two, and not just from a local level for the YMCA of Greater Rochester, but also through our national network. We're currently looking at the senior management across all 853 of the YMCAs across the country, and we don't see diversity reflected in those positions. So we're looking very carefully and very closely at what are the succession planning efforts that are happening in the YMCA movement to fill some of those positions with diverse candidates or put diverse candidates forward. How are recruiting efforts looking across the nation with respect to recruiting diverse candidates? But again, these statistics are not just specific to the YMCA. These are from companies across the board, so you may be seeing the same challenges within your own organization. So what is workplace diversity? What does that look like? I like this visual because it shows diversity in from a different perspective. So think of diversity as an iceberg. And the top of the iceberg, which you could see, reflects the obvious dimensions of diversity. But below the iceberg, there are other dimensions of diversity which you may not see. And here they are visually. And workplace diversity is defined as a collective mixture of differences and similarities that include individual and organizational characteristics, values, beliefs, experiences, background, preferences, and behavior. So here are just a few examples that you may be aware of. So as you can see, the ones that are obvious that you may be aware of that are on the surface are the visible diversity traits, but then there may be invisible diversity traits that you're not aware of. And again, this is just a sampling. There are many, many more. So I've referenced the YMCA throughout the presentation, and I wanted to share what inclusion means for us. So at the YMCA of Greater Rochester, inclusion is the achievement of a work environment in which all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. have equal access to opportunities and resources, and can contribute fully towards the organization's success. Let's shift now and look at workplace demographics overall. So, who will make up most of the new entrants to the U.S. workforce? What opportunities will the future workforce bring? And what challenge will the future workforce present? So, who are the new entrants to the workforce? Well, we have women, Latinos and Hispanics, Asians, African Americans, American Indians, people with disabilities, LGBTQ, veterans of armed forces, generations X and Y, and the millennials, and the sandwich generation, baby boomers seeking their second careers, single parents and heads of households, college graduates, immigrants and newcomers, and less experienced and also skilled workers. Going forward, 75% of the new entrants to the workforce will be women and people of color. Changing family patterns in the United States, single parents, dual income houses, we'll see a growth in elder care and child care will bring new challenges. The U.S. Department of Labor estimated that by 2010, American businesses will face labor shortages of more than 2 million workers with the onslaught of baby boomers retiring. Every day, 10,000 boomers turn 55 years old. What's interesting about this particular statistic, in 2008, we had the stock market fallout, which impacted many baby boomers' retirement plans. So as a result, many of the baby boomers either stayed in the workforce or got back into the workforce to make up for that loss that they suffered during that period of time. So we're seeing the opposite effect, an opposite trend, that we're seeing more baby boomers available to be in the workforce. For the first time, the number of workers entering the workforce will not replace those resulting in a labor shortage. By 2050, Asians, Hispanics, African Americans, and American Indians will account for 47.2% of the population. By 2012, the Hispanic labor force, which is still the fastest growing minority segment, reached 23.8 million and continues to grow. The number of women in the labor force will grow by 14.3% compared to 10% for men. 10% of the workforce identifies themselves as gay or lesbian, and it's estimated that 1 in 4 people in the workforce will have a disability, either perceived or invisible. So what challenges do those bring? It may bring communication and language issues. There'll be an expectation of higher salaries, flexible benefits, and more perks. Increased turnover. There'll be increased job mobility, job shopping more frequently, and we see that quite prevalent with the millennial generation. More training needs. Creating innovative ways to attracting, recruiting, and retaining. More challenging work, diversity of thought, generational differences, accommodations, potential conflicts, expectation to see diversity part of the organization's culture and strategy with an emphasis on inclusion, having the latest and the best technology, and also working with individuals with less work experience. On the flip side, diversity brings more opportunities. You have fresher, broader ideas, technological competence, a workforce that's willing to take risks, greater flexibility and adaptability, agility, greater comfort with diversity and inclusion, greater creativity. Organizations will be extremely results-oriented. Increased language skills will bring better global communications, multicultural and marketing ideas, more internationally focused, and cross-cultural competence. There is another resource and reference that I would like to share with you, and that is by Joel Barker. And the title of his book is Wealth, Innovation, and Diversity, and it is a phenomenal and fantastic study on how diversity increases the wealth and innovation of organizations across the world. So again, that is Joel Barker, and the book is entitled Wealth, Innovation, and Diversity. So why diversity? There are many reasons why an organization might and should focus on diversity. Usually they fall under two broad themes: the values case and the business case. The values case says it's the right thing to do and it will make our people happier. The business case says it's a smart thing to do for business and we will improve our bottom line. Important to note that both the values case and the business case are important and necessary, and they do not contradict each other, but rather complement each other. So why is a business case important? And you may be saying to yourself, well, after all, why isn't doing the right thing enough? Well, strategic diversity management plans depend on the commitment of many people in the organization, not least of which is your CEO or equivalent or senior leadership team. These leaders are naturally focused on the financial health and well-being of the organization. A strong business case for diversity will clearly show that creating a diverse and inclusive workplace will benefit everyone in the organization by making the organization stronger, more resilient, and more competitive. So this graphic shows how moving from your current state to a diversity outcome to business outcome, so how diversity and inclusion are tied together and what the results are. And I won't read each of these to you, but for example, if you look at the marketplace bullet, you have customer and member satisfaction, and then when you couple that with a diversity and inclusion strategy, you end up with customer and member and employee attraction and retention, which is at a higher level than customer and member satisfaction. Diversity and inclusion helps the business's bottom line in several ways. It gives you greater adaptability and flexibility in a rapidly changing marketplace. It enables you to attract and retain the best talent. It reduces costs associated with turnover, absenteeism, and low productivity. You see tangible return on investment from various initiatives, policies, and practices. You gain and keep greater and new market share, both locally and globally, with an expanded diverse customer base. You'll see increased sales and profits, and it also helps to mitigate and minimize any legal risks. Let's talk about greater flexibility and adaptability. The workforce continues to change demographically and globally. Organizations need to be able to flex and adapt in times of increasing complexity and change, and that comes through technology, policies and processes, and producers and services. With respect to customer service, diverse organizations are better able to serve a diverse customer and client base. Think back to when I mentioned before that we look very closely through the lens of the shifting demographics that happen in our community, and we want to make sure that we meet their needs by also having a staff component that reflects that shifting demographic. So that is intentional and part of our strategy. So with respect to attracting and retaining the best talent, so which do you believe? Talent exists independently of variables such as race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, religion, marital/parental status, or socioeconomic background, or do you believe that talent is tied to variables such as race, gender, sexual orientation, ability, religion, marital/parental status, or socioeconomic background? If you're leaning towards number one, how much talent does your organization currently have access to? So we're about to face a talent shortage due to baby boomers' retirement, for example. So are you prepared? So finding talent is seen as the most important management challenge facing business executives for the next 5 years. And they're looking at increasing the number of markets that they serve, increasing their footprint or their company size, having greater competitive intensity, but also finding talent. So in order to achieve the first three, they have to have the talent to do that. So finding talent is seen as an incredible business challenge. Lower turnover, absenteeism, and low productivity. When an employee perceives that a company and its leadership are committed to a diverse and fair workplace, they are most likely to stay with that company. They are very likely to recommend their company to others. They are less likely to have experienced discrimination, and less likely to have missed days at work, and they're more engaged in your work. So when you look at turnover, absenteeism, and low productivity, if you engage, for example, in an employee satisfaction survey, well, how are the results looking within the context of these bullet points? Each year, more than 2 million people voluntarily leave their organizations due to perceived unfairness, and that could be a result of comments or jokes or unfair policies or perceived invisibility. This trend costs U.S. corporations $64 billion a year, and that figure is equivalent to the combined revenues of Google, Goldman Sachs, Starbucks, and Amazon.com, and it does not include costs associated with either litigation or loss of reputation. So just in the turnover alone, the $64 billion figure is staggering when you see how the impact of people voluntarily leaving your organization does. So let's talk about the return on investment. As HR practitioners, we tend to speak in terms of human resource outcomes. So, for example, hiring the best and most qualified talent is equal to a more diverse workforce with a greater representation, increased retention of our minority employees, greater pay equity, fairness for employee, movement of, when you fill in the blank, of a percentage of an employee engagement and attitude results, external recognition and awards, for example, Diversity Inc., AARP, etc., having a more inclusive work environment, and a number of employees trained. We should speak, and those are important, but we should speak in terms about business outcomes. And I'm just getting the 7-minute warning from Jim. Thank you, Jim. You should talk in terms of increased revenues and profitability, increased market share and expansion, innovative and quality solutions and product development, stock price performance if you're a for-profit organization, return on investment, customer and member satisfaction and retention results, competitive index, productivity, process and product improvements. We should not try to convince our senior management team to speak our language. We have to speak theirs. When we continue to speak only in terms of HR outcomes, we will continue to sell. We will have to continue to sell and justify our value. So we have to basically interpret the first slide to how it relates to this slide in particular. I want to stop there and answer some of the questions. And Jim, will we have an opportunity for folks to ask questions via audio?
Absolutely, Fernand. We can open that up anytime you would like to do that, if you're ready to.
Yes, why don't we do that? I'll open up the floor to questions since we're got about I think you said about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, we have about 5 minutes for questions.
Okay.
So if any folks on the session, open up your audio and feel free to ask Fernand a question on diversity as a strategy. Anyone have a question?
Fernand, this is Rhonda Boas Blue. Thank you very much for the information that you've shared with us today. I was wondering from the training perspective, so that that fifth step in your process.
Yes.
You mentioned quite a few of the management resources. Are there any resources or topics that you can share around the overall awareness and professional development piece?
Yes, and that's a great question, and it's going to depend on your organization and what the needs are. So, for example, we start off with what I'll call an introduction to diversity and inclusion, and then based on the specific needs of the demographics of our organization, we have for managers managing cultural differences within the organization as part of the management training, and then we have specific cultural training depending on the demographics of a particular branch, for example. One of our branches, for example, is seeing a very high influx of immigrants from Spanish-speaking countries, so we are offering a training to that management staff that addresses that culture and how to interact and work with that culture. Does that help?
Yes, that did. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So the key is when you conduct your needs assessment, that should yield for you what specific training that you need. And I would say resist the temptation, there's a lot of great training that's out there, but the mistake that I've seen happen is people approach it as an off-the-shelf solution for diversity and inclusion, and that's where the pitfall may happen. So really, you really need to dig in deep and see what the specific needs are before selecting your diversity and inclusion training solution. And there are many excellent consultants in the area that could help in that endeavor to make sure that you're getting the right training resources to move your strategic plan forward.
And Fernand, that's a great point. And again, just to point out some of the things that we do at MCC Corporate College, that needs assessment component is a critical piece when we're working with companies to evaluate training needs in either this subject area or others. We don't do anything that's off the shelf. It's all determined by that needs assessment that we work with companies or individual departments within companies to make sure that the right training is in front of folks. So Fernand hit the nail on the head as far as making sure that you and your companies are drilling down to the absolute need and putting the right content in front of people.
Any other questions? I advanced to the very last slide, which addresses leveraging diversity to succeed, and this is essentially the summary of what to expect on this journey and how you could be successful in achieving that. So I will close with a quote from Jim O'Toole and Ed Lawler. If workers are not committed, motivated, engaged, trained, and appropriately supervised, they will underperform, with disastrous consequences for a nation's global competitiveness. So it's important to equip the individuals and within the organization with those tools so that they have cultural competence, emotional intelligence, et cetera, to make diversity and inclusion a success. And I think if we don't have any other questions, I think that brings us to the end, Jim. Yes?
Thanks, Fernand. We appreciate your time with us today, and great presentation. We certainly thank you for giving all of these folks an opportunity to understand the strategic approach to diversity and inclusion in your company, and that can certainly be used as a model for others. Folks, on this WebEx session, I direct you to the landing page at MCC Corporate College. This is our workforceforward.com page, where you'll find all our professional development opportunities, including the next class that Fernand will be leading for us, which is under the Human Resources section. Those of you who are looking to be certified, the SHRM CP or the SCP, our next class begins in February. All of our corporate college programs are available here, and we look forward to you joining the next Training Tuesday session, which will be scheduled on Tuesday, January 10th. We will be hosting Bob Fries, who will be discussing the conscious leadership program that we have here and just the conscious culture that's sweeping the country. Many successful companies are using a conscious approach to leadership development, and we have Bob Fries to tell us all about that. January 10th, again at noon. Fernand, thank you again very much for joining us today and providing this outstanding session for people who joined us. Thank you all for joining us at MCC Corporate College for our Training Tuesdays webinar.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Thank you all for attending.